They look innocent enough, folks, don't they? Sugar, even organic sugar. Deodorant, everybody wears deodorant every day, and bras. But believe me, these are the 3 major causes of cancer that has reached epidemics in this country. Join me, my name is Roseanne Gilmer, for my show, Truth or Consequences, where we will explore and expose the food and nutrition wrongs that are causing the epidemics of disease in our world. Thank you. I'll see you then. this epidemics of disease, what has happened to our world? Believe me, the answers are simple. Join me in my show, Truth or Consequences, where we will explore why we have epidemics of diseases and learn how easy the solutions really are. My name is Roseanne Gilmer. My show is Truth or Consequences. Join me on the 1st, the 2nd, and the 4th Wednesdays, where we will cover these issues and give you the answers that you've been looking for. Thank you. I hope to see you then.
In Season 1 of The Story of Stuff, we looked at a system that creates way too much stuff and way too little of what we really want. Now we're going to start looking at the stories behind this story of stuff. That's where we'll find ways to turn this situation around. Welcome to Season 2. Ever since I learned where our stuff really comes from and how this system is trashing people and the planet, I've been trying to figure out how we can change it. I've read a lot of these. 100 ways to save the planet without leaving your house. 50 simple things you can do to save the Earth. The Little Green Book of Shopping. I thought these might have the answers, but their tips all start here, with buying better stuff. And they all end here, with recycling all that stuff when I'm done with it. But when it comes to making change, this story of going green, even though we see it everywhere, has some serious shortcomings. It says that if I become a smarter shopper and tell all my friends to do the same, I've done my part. And if I don't buy all this green stuff, then it's my fault the planet's being destroyed. Wait a minute, my fault? I didn't choose to put toxic products on the shelves or allow slave labor in factories around the world. I didn't choose to fill stores with electronics that can't be repaired and have to be thrown away. I didn't choose a world in which some people can afford to live green, leaving the rest of us to be irresponsible planet wreckers. Of course, when we do shop, we should buy the least toxic and most fair products we can. But it's not bad shoppers here who are the source of the problem. It's bad policies and bad business practices here. And that's why the solutions we really need are not for sale at the supermarket.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of What We Should Know, coming to you from Cambridge Community Television here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Today's program is in reference to, of course, the Donald Trump election and the historical realities of similar occasions, similar events, and the consequences which directed the nations after an election of someone who supported white supremacist ideas. Whether or not Trump says that he supports the right-wing radicals is not really the question. His activities and his statements prior and during the election process was clear by saying that he advocated Muslims from being prevented to enter the United States, referring to large numbers of minorities as being criminals and using particular adjectives of a extremely derogatory nature, and the reality that these people, these minorities were completely referred to in derogatory terms, generalizing negative characteristics to an entire population. Also, his misogynistic ideas and comments in reference to women show that he has an extreme hatred or disregard for women He will deny this. Others may jump into the position to establish that Donald Trump is not what he's been characterized to be. But simply the characterization that Trump gives himself must be clear that this individual is someone who is divisive in a major fashion. The idea, of course, that middle of the road politicians, particularly those of the Republican Party, but also many Democrats, saying, give Trump time, give him the opportunity to select a cabinet, to put forward his ideas, disregards the reality that he was elected under an antiquated system which controls the popular vote by replacing it with a vote of elites. The 270 votes required by the Electoral College just simply ensures the preference of established party politicians and insiders against the popular vote of an individual. This could have happened not only with Clinton, it could have happened with Sanders if he had received the popular vote and was not regarded as a candidate acceptable to the party elites, the party insiders. This is the discussion that we're going to have here today at What We Should Know here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we appreciate those of you who are tuning in a little later in our show. Let's begin by getting a look at what happened in a similar situation. We will remember that white supremacy was the background in the election of a democratic election process in Germany in the early 1930s. What we're going to look at today is how, after the democratic election took place and the individual to lead the government was chosen, how he consolidated power and then finally eliminated all others in the checks and balance, which could have provided a checks and balance, eliminated the opposition parties, eliminated the congressional system, and consolidated his power to the extent that he used a dictator status. Let's get a look in the Weimar politics. We're looking basically at a Wikipedia article concerning this idea. Weimar was the name of the governmental era in Germany after the First World War and up to the Second World War, at which time the head of government was moved under Hitler, then to Berlin. But under Weimar, the information on Wikipedia is the Wall Street crash of 1929 heralded worldwide economic disaster. The Nazis and the communists made great gains in the 1930 election. Both the Nazis and the communists were pledged to eliminating democracy, and between them secured over 50% of the Reichstag seats, which required the moderate parties to consider negotiations with the anti-democrats. The communists, wrote Bullock, openly announced that they would prefer to see the Nazis in power rather than lift a finger to save the Republic. No one's really sure about that comment, but the information from Wikipedia continues here. It says the Weimar political parties failed to stop the Nazi rise. Germany's Weimar political system made it difficult for chancellors, those are the heads of the government, to govern with a stable parliamentary majority, and successive chancellors instead relied on the president's emergency powers to govern. From 1931 to 1933, the Nazis combined terror tactics and conventional campaigning. Hitler crisscrossed the nation by air while SA troops paraded in the streets, beat up opponents, and broke up their meetings. A middle-class liberal party strong enough to block the Nazis did not exist. The People's Party and the Democrats suffered severe losses to the Nazis in the polls. The Social Democrats were essentially a conservative trade party with intellectual leadership. The Catholic Center Party maintained its voting bloc, but was preoccupied with defending its own particular interest, wrote Bollock. The Center Party's Heinrich Brüning was chancellor from 1930 to 1932. Brüning and Hitler were unable to reach terms of cooperation, but Brüning himself increasingly governed in support of the president and the army over that to the parliament. The 84-year-old President von Hindenburg, a general during World War I, a conservative monarchist, was reluctant to take action to suppress the Nazis, while the ambitious Major General Kurt von Schleicher, as minister handling Army and Navy matters, hoped to harness their support. With Schleicher's backing, Hitler stated approval. Hindenburg appointed the Catholic monarchist Franz von Papen to replace Brüning as chancellor in June of 1932, and Papen had been active in the resurgence of the front, leading to the rise of Hitler. We thank Wikipedia for the opportunity, by the way, of using this elective information. The seizure and control of 1931 and 33. On March 10th, 1931, with street violence between the road front and the SA spiraling out of control, breaking up previous barriers and expectations, Prussia re-elected its ban on brown shirts days after the SA, that's the Nazis, the SA, men shot dead 2 communists in a street fight, which led to a ban being placed on public speaking of Goebbels. There is a similarity which needs to be mentioned here, and that is the killings in the streets. The amount of violence during this period of history in Germany was very similar to the violence that we have here with police killing demonstrators or individuals who they consider to be threatening their existence by simply leaving the scene, walking away, or holding up their arms. This is the reality of the situation in Germany as well. So 3 days after presidential elections, the German government banned the NSDAP. That was the designation for the German right-wing military. The SA and the SS, on the basis of emergency decree for the preservation of the state authority. The action was largely prompted by details that emerged at a trial of SA men for assaulting unarmed Jews in Berlin. After less than a month, the law was repealed by Papen, Chancellor of Germany, on 30th of May. Such ambivalence about the fate of Jews was supported by a culture of anti-Semitism that prevailed in Germany, in the German public at the time. We can replace in this idea the extreme racist idea brought forward by the right-wing radicals in information and statements they have made, KKK and other right-wing organizations in the United States at this time. Chancellor to dictator. Following, there was a fire, of course, in the Reichstag. Everyone will remember that in 1933. The Nazis began to suspend civil liberties and eliminate political opposition. The communists were excluded from the Reichstag at the 1933 elections. Again, no single party secured a majority. Hitler required the vote of the Center Party and conservatives in the Reichstag to obtain the powers he desired. He called on the Reichstag members to vote for the Enabling Act on the 24th of March, 1933. Hitler was granted preliminary powers, temporary, by the passage of the act. The law gave him the freedom to act without parliamentary consent and even without constitutional limitations. Employing his characteristic mix of negotiation and intimidation, Hitler offered the possibility of friendly cooperation, promising not to threaten the Reichstag, the president, the states, or the churches if granted the emergency powers. With Nazi parliamentary paramilitary encircling the building, he said, "It is for you, gentlemen of the Reichstag, to decide between war and peace." The Center Party, having obtained promises of non-interference in religion, joined with conservatives in voting for the act. Only the Social Democrats voted against it. The act allowed Hitler and his cabinet to rule on emergency decree for 4 years. Though Hindenburg remained president, Hitler immediately set out abolishing the powers of the states and the existence of non-Nazi political parties and organizations. Non-Nazi parties were formally outlawed on the 14th of July, and the Reichstag abdicated its democratic responsibilities. What becomes known, of course, in this part of the historical development is how Hitler used a temporary emergency act then to eliminate his competition, eliminate any restraints or restrictions within the governmental structure, any type of constitutional idea or legal structures which would impede his dictatorial powers were pushed aside. In this ability to enact emergency measures, the act of that kind is already in place in the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, which was passed in 2011 by Barack Obama. This act enables the mass incarceration without a trial of American citizens simply by the suspicion brought forward by anyone from the military or a government official that they may be plotting the overthrow or detriment or harm to the United States government or individuals. This emergency act is already in power, one that Hitler required to establish the right-wing dictatorship. It's important that we also look at the ideas supporting similar developments in other nations at that time. It's not simply that this took place in Germany. It took place also in Spain at about the same time. On July 18th, this is from this calendar, this day in history, which is a function that we can find under the history section. It says military officers in the Spanish Morocco, and let me start at the beginning. On July 18th, 1936, the Spanish Civil War begins as a revolt by right-wing Spanish military officers in Spanish Morocco and spreads to the mainland of Spain. From the Canary Islands, General Franco broadcast a message calling for all army officers to join the uprising. Within 3 days, the rebels captured, the rebels meaning the right-wing extremists under Franco, who were opposing a Republican, what was called the elected government. They happened to be called Republicans. Meanwhile, Franco flew to Morocco and prepared to bring the Army of Africa over to the mainland. In 1931, Spanish King Alfonso XIII authorized elections to decide the government of Spain, and voters overwhelmingly chose to abolish the monarchy in favor of the liberal republic. Alfonso went into exile. The landed aristocracy, it now describes something about the various groups. The landed aristocracy, the church, and large military clique opposed the democratically elected government. And in November of 1933, conservative forces regained control of the government in elections. In response, socialists launched a revolution in the mining districts of Asturias and Catalan. Nationalists rebelled in Barcelona. General Franco crushed the so-called October Revolution on behalf of the conservative government, and in 1935 he was appointed chief of staff. In February 1936, new elections brought the Popular Front, the leftist coalition, to power, and Franco, a strict monarchist, was sent to an obscure command in the Canary Islands. So he had attempted a putsch. Franco, the neo-fascist in Spain in the 1930s, a military individual, had already attempted a military takeover, but he was counteracted and sent, fearing that the liberal government would give way to Marxist revolution. Army officers conspired to seize power. After a period of hesitation, Franco agreed to join the military conspiracy. So it then explains how this reactionary government took power in a similar point in time a few years later than Germany, and under slightly different circumstances. But the reality in both of these cases is the idea of right-wing extremists, individuals who are racist in nature, who believe in white supremacy, who believe in a dictatorship of the moneyed aristocracy and the military. The magazine Mother Jones has come up with some interesting concepts and ideas regarding the right wing in the modern era. And we thank Mother Jones magazine for the possibility of using this information in our program. With as many appeals to nativism, bigotry, and bitter discontent, Donald Trump has enthralled far-right extremists with his campaign for president. According to an investigation by Mother Jones and the Investigative Fund at the National Institute, since Trump officially announced his bid in June of 2015, he has drawn effusive praise and formal backing from some of the country's most virulent neo-Nazis, white supremacists and military supporters, and other extremist leaders. They include the head of the American Nazi Party, 3 former Ku Klux Klansmen, 4 people involved in a recent armed standoff against federal authorities at the Oregon Wildlife Refuge, and at least 15 individuals affiliated with organizations described by the Southern Poverty Law Center as hate groups. So apparently, according to this opinion, Trump has disavowed none of them. We have a wonderful opportunity here, folks, that may never come again, wrote Rocky J. Suhaida, the head of the American Nazi Party last fall. Donald Trump's campaign statements, if nothing else, have shown that our views, meaning the Nazi Party views, according to this Mother Jones article, are not so unpopular as the political correctness crowd have told everyone they are. The biggest story in the filthy is something that will not be repeated here, but it can be read in the left-hand corner of this. During the Republican National Convention in July, Trump endorser Andrew Anglin, who runs the neo-Nazi website called the Daily Stormer, wrote, "The biggest story in the..." That's not going to be repeated here either. It could be read then from the website on your screen. Responding to questions about his views by email, Anglin echoed Trump's statements about the 2016 elections being rigged, warning, if he loses, it is by fraud, and all of these people who are currently supporting him are going to be radicalized. Trump, he said, will order a putsch. Others among Trump's extremist endorsers have advocated a violent overthrow of the U.S. government, expressed hatred for blacks, Latinos, Muslims, and Jews, and threatened to level and demolish every mosque across the country. Last February, praise for Trump from former Klansman David Duke attracted widespread media attention, eventually spurring Trump to distance himself from the Louisiana political figure. But Trump has not rejected endorsements from many of those other extremists, none of whom have before openly backed a major party nominee for the White House. Hillary Clinton has accused Trump of taking hate groups mainstream. In August, Trump declared at a campaign rally, we will steadfastly reject bigotry and hatred and oppression in all of its ugly forms. The Trump campaign, however, did not respond to multiple detailed requests for comment about the following list of nearly 24 extremist endorsers. The list is here on the website. The Ku Klux Klan affiliates, militia affiliates, so there are obviously group after group of right-wing individuals supporting Donald Trump. But it's not only these right-wing people that theoretically supported him, it's also his chief of staff who was chosen, who was a right-wing radical who was chosen as the main strategy person within his cabinet, meaning, of course, that the strategy developed for the Trump campaign is done by a right-wing radical. And anyone studying the development of these types of political extremists know that the overall concept is put together by a right-wing radical to coordinate the events and what role each of the governmental organization or its supporters outside of the government are to play. It's a strategy situation brought about similar to the development of a campaign. The question that we have, of course, here at What We Should Know is what makes up the structure of these individuals, and what opportunity do governmental organizations have to actually oppose these developments. The mythology of Trump's working class support is an idea, a concept brought forward by 538, which is a news and information structure, a blog on the internet. We're thanking them for the opportunity to use this information. The median household income by state to state regarding, on the left-hand column, the state median income, then the median income, household income for those that supported Clinton, Sanders, Cruz, Kalish, and Trump. So one can certainly look, the median income for the state would be here. For Maryland, why they start off with M instead of A, I have no idea. It was 79,000 for the median income, which is almost twice the median average nationally. Clinton was 92,000 for her supporters, Sanders 77,000, Cruz 92,000, Kalish 119,000, and Trump 95,000. So one can look, 76 median income for New Hampshire. For Vermont, it was 83, and for Vermont, it was 63, and for Sanders supporters, it was 61, a close matchup. But for Trump supporters was 70, and Clinton supporters for Vermont was $80,000 a year. So in all states, to look at the median income, all states gathered together were 56 as an average, 91 for Kalish, and 72 for Donald Trump. So 25% higher for Trump, 40% higher for Kalish. Sanders was about the same or quite similar, as was the median income for Clinton supporters. Let's get a look now at, basically, we've seen what the supports income, median income, were for the various candidates there, including Trump. But what we haven't seen clearly is the white supremacy culture, which makes up a part of the Trump support network. Of course, most unusual being that Trump has selected someone from the right-wing parties to be his chief strategist. Steve Bannon is his name. let's get a look at what the white supremacy culture here in America basically says. So it says, this is a list of the characteristics of white supremacy culture which show up in our organizations. Culture is powerful precisely because it is so present and at the same time so very difficult to name or identify. The characteristics listed below are damaging because they are used as norms and standards without being proactively named or chosen by the group. They are damaging because they promote white supremacy thinking. They are damaging to both people of color and white people. Organizations that are people of color led or a minority of color, people of color can also demonstrate many damaging characteristics of white supremacy culture. Perfectionism. This is one of the ideas that white supremacy culture basically has incorporated concerning the idea of perfection. Other concepts are sense of urgency, defensiveness, and quantity over quality. Also worship of the written word, also paternalism, either or thinking, and power hoarding, fear of open conflict, individualism, and progress is bigger and more. So let's get a look basically at these general ideas. Quantity over quality is one idea which right-wing radicals and white supremacists believe in. But the top of the list here is perfectionism. Little appreciation expressed among people for the work that others are doing. Appreciation that is expressed usually directed at those who get most of the credit anyway. More common is to point out either how the person or work is inadequate. The sense of urgency is the second criteria here. It says, a continued sense of urgency that makes it difficult to take time to be inclusive, encourage democratic and or thoughtful decision making, and to think long-term, to consider consequences. Defensiveness, that's another aspect of radical right-wing conservatism. It says the organizational structure is set up and much energy spent on trying to prevent abuse and protect power as it exists rather than to facilitate the best out of each person or to clarify who has power and how they are expected to use it. The quality over quantity, the quantity over quality argument. All resources of organization are directed toward producing measurable goals. And the worship of the written word is a further idea exemplifying the concept that fundamentalists have. If it is not in a memo, it doesn't exist. If organizations, if the organization does not take into account the value, other ways in which information gets shared. And there's only one right way is another idea, the worship of the written word. And paternalism is similar to the concept used here by either or thinking. It says things are either good or bad, right or wrong, with us or against us. That is the idea that absolute loyalty and either belonging to the organization or being outside of the organization is concerned. One knows about these ideas also from fundamentalists. And power hoarding, it says here, as another aspect of right-wing radical thinking. Power hoarding, little if any value around sharing of power, and power seen as limited, only so much to go around. In other words, there's a principle of similar in the military, that the power is centered in the commanding officer, and the commanding officer then has complete and utter power. However, in this structure, it's not a military structure, but rather a civil structure, but run as though the idea of power distribution is not given. And we see this basically in many forms of totalitarian and right-wing organizations. Individualism is a further idea of the right wing. It says little experience or comfort working as part of a team, and people in organization believe they are responsible for solving problems alone rather than solving problems with other organizations. The objectivity is the belief that there is such a thing as being objective. The belief that emotions are inherently destructive, irrational, and should not play a role in decision-making in the group process, and the invalidating people who show emotion. In other words, individuals who show emotion are considered to be weak or not acceptable to have power or to share power. Leaders are supposed to be completely unemotional. We will remember in an interesting movie in which the name of the movie was Saving Private Ryan, and in this particular part of the film, a conflict had come about, and it looked as though the team that was looking to find the lost soldier, Private Ryan, was in a severe conflict due to the death of one of their members in a skirmish in a military contact with the enemy. And while the crisis was taking place, the character of Tom Hanks unified the group again by showing an extremely clever and very emotional aspect of his leadership. The entire idea took less than 2 minutes to bring forward, but unified the group again because of the nature of the emotional content that the question that the character of Hanks brought forward. This is an idea that leadership is often a case of understanding and using emotional content to unify groups for a mission, for a team effort. And this is denied then by, apparently by right-wing organizations. What is interesting in a further aspect of our analysis today regarding the right-wing support is the idea of whether or not states and to what extent states have the right then to oppose impositions by the federal government on their authority. We think, for instance, on the idea of the usurping of power by the federal government and how states can basically protect their citizens from incursions by the federal government. It says in all 50 states offering petitions to the central government to leave the Union. This is a question of secession, and I don't believe that was what was meant. This is the idea that we're looking to follow. It's a question of whether or not states have the right to nullify or disregard federal laws. It says here, and it's an article by Robert A. Levy. This article appeared in the Investor's Business Daily on March 18, 2013. It says, rumblings from the ardent states' rights advocates grow louder in the wake of the perceived federal overreach in such areas as healthcare, immigration reform, marijuana regulation, and gun control. This is of great interest to us then, of course. And this is the point that we're bringing up today. So it says, indeed, on March 13th, the Oklahoma House voted overwhelmingly to invalidate President Obama's signature legislation, the Affordable Care Act. That process is known as nullification. But is it constitutional? That's the idea. In a nutshell, state officials need not enforce federal laws that the state has determined to be unconstitutional, nor may Congress mandate that states enact specific laws. But two, states may not block federal authorities who attempt to enforce a federal law unless a court has held that the law is unconstitutional. And three, individuals are not exempt from prosecution by the federal government just because the state they reside has legalized an activity or pronounced that a federal law is unconstitutional. If conceived, individuals can attempt to vindicate their constitutional rights in court. In other words, the individuals may have the right to contest the federal law in a court of law, and thereby establish that it is unconstitutional. Let's examine each of these questions. It says first, all states required to enforce federal laws and enact regulatory programs that Congress mandates. Are states required to enforce federal laws and enact regulatory programs that Congress mandates? The answer to both of these is no. In 1997, in Prince versus United States, the Supreme Court ruled that the federal government could not command state law enforcement authorities to conduct background checks on prospective handgun purchases. In 1992 case, New York versus United States, the court ruled that Congress couldn't require states to enact specified waste disposal regulations. The second question is more difficult. Can a state impede federal authorities from enforcing their own law if the state deems the law to be unconstitutional? The answer is no. Although more radical nullification proponents would disagree. They point to the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions of 1798 and 1799, in which Thomas Jefferson and James Madison asserted a state's right to nullify. And that's interesting. So the idea of Prince versus United States in 1997 seems to be an interesting case in point. The Supreme Court in Prince versus United States ruled that federal government could not command state law enforcement authorities to conduct background checks on prospective handgun purchases. The second question we've already read. We're moving forward now then to Marbury versus Madison, the framers constructed. We're close to the end of our program, and would like to suggest then that at home, if our viewers are interested, to analyze the opportunities that states would have to disregard laws enacted by the federal government, which would impede upon freedoms. We say this particularly because of the idea which may be brought forward that nationalist or right-wing organizations may plan to enact legislation of a racist nature, and the opportunities that states would have to disregard or to block the enactment. Thanks for joining us, and have a good week.